America was built on slavery. This has become a standard trope of critical race theory. It is something that is taught in our schools. It is something that has now surfaced on a Disney show called The Proud Family. It's a kind of a cartoon show, but weaved into it are themes of slavery and reparations. And I want to just quote a line or two. This country was built on slavery, which means slaves built this country. It goes on to talk about why that creates a foundation, a moral foundation for reparations. Now, this may seem like inarguable, which is to say self-evident. I want to argue that's one of those things that we tend to take for granted so much that it takes a little bit of thought and scrutiny to realize that it's not true. What is not true? This country was not built on slavery, and slaves didn't build it. And think of how if what I said is true, it blows the foundation for reparations right out of the water. The premise itself is false. But how can it be false? Didn't slaves, at least some would say, well, they certainly helped to build this country, didn't they? And I would say, in a sense, no. And the reason I say no is because it's not that the slaves didn't do any building. Slaves, of course, there was some slavery in the North also before the American founding. Most of slavery was either abolished or on its way to being abolished in the era of the American founding. And then slavery became more regional. It was in the South, mainly plantation slavery, small and large plantations. Okay, so the slaves built the plantations. But what happened to the plantations in the Civil War? They were destroyed. They were leveled to the ground. Sherman burned Atlanta. So at the end of the Civil War, what was left in the South was very little. Just land, agriculture. The South had to sort of rebuild its way out of, a kind of rubble. So what the slaves built was destroyed during the Civil War. And the idea that America today is somehow built by slavery is, I think, nonsensical. Now, it's tempting for people to go from there to say, well, all right, but what about the immigrants? Didn't the immigrants build America? No, they didn't either. Now, I'm not saying that the immigrants, again, didn't do anything, they didn't work, but the country was built by the original European settlers. They are the ones who established the economic and political and moral foundations for a strong, prosperous, and decent nation. And then this is me tweeting, we are all living off the fruits of their labor. Now, I knew when I said this, it would sort of set off a little bit of a social media stir, and sure enough, I get all kinds of comebacks. And one of these comebacks is, well, Dinesh, the settlers are the same as immigrants. You're talking about settlers, but didn't the settlers come from another country? Doesn't this make them immigrants? No. Settlers are not the same as immigrants. There's a real difference between a settler and an immigrant. I put it this way. The settler is the guy who shows up and builds the country. He's the first guy to actually create the recipe for a society. Now, if it happens to be a good society, good recipe, good society, then immigrants will leave their own country and move voluntarily to the better country that the settlers have created. In other words, immigrants move to already existing established societies because they like the way that society is run or organized. But who organized it? Not the immigrant, the settler. And this is why the countless immigrants who have come to America over the generations, me included, all of us owe a great debt to the Pilgrims and to the original settlers. They are the ones, more than anyone else, more than the immigrants, more than the slaves, they are the ones who really built America. Now, once I establish propositions that are hard to argue against, I get quibbles. And here's a quibble that comes from somebody on social media. Hey, Dinesh, care to weigh in on the assertion that European settlers weren't immigrants? I'm sure lots of First Nation leaders, meaning Native Americans, would have a different interpretation of history. And here I make the point that being here first doesn't mean anything. I mean, does the first Bedouin who arrives at an oasis own the oasis? No. European settlers are the ones who developed this country. They built towns and cities. They established the nation on a political and economic foundation. They created this widespread opportunity and this widespread prosperity. I think I speak for immigrants here. We didn't come to the America the Native Americans created. If the Native Americans had continued to run the show, I would still be back in India. The reason that immigrants like me came to America is to be part of the country that the original settlers created here. That's the America that we're grateful for.
Hey, Dinesh, you got something brown on your nose. On the tip of your nose, Dinesh, you got something brown. You might want to wipe it off. You might want to get off your knees and wipe off that brown on your nose. But happy Friday, my people. Welcome to On the Shoulders of Giants. I am Joseph Ward, and I am here to bring some sense to this commentary by Dinesh D'Souza. And this video was sent to me. Shout out to KMLTC emailed me this video. So shout out to KMLTC for sending me this video and asking me to debunk this video. So of course I'm obliged. I'm gonna oblige, right? So Dinesh Joseph D'Souza, and I'm mad that his middle name is Joseph. He is an Indian-born American right-wing political commentator, conspiracy theorist, author, and filmmaker. He has made several films and written over a dozen books, several of them New York Times bestsellers. So remember, he's an Indian-born American right-wing political commentator, conspiracy theorist, author, and filmmaker. So this really ain't his lane, but he's a white supremacist apologist. He's a white supremacist supporter. He be on his knees. So, but before we get deep into this, before I go ahead and educate Dinesh, please hit that like button, comment, subscribe, share, and hit that hype button. And remember, over here, we facts over feelings over here. We human beings, and sometimes, you know, we get rowdy, but facts over feelings, right? So let's make sure that we attack this sensibly, because I see what Dinesh is doing, and I'm going to deconstruct everything that Dinesh is doing. So follow me. Dinesh D'Souza is primarily using the word built in the political and institutional sense. Who created constitutional order? Who created the legal system? Who created the philosophy of government and the economic framework of America? In the video we just watched, he argues that the European colonists and founders established America's political, economic, and moral institutions, and that those institutions, not slavery or immigration, explains America's long-term success. Now, I'm not even arguing immigration. I'm arguing the intentional removal of the contribution, of the physical labor contribution of enslaved Black Americans. That's what I'm arguing. So Dinesh, you got to get exposed today. So once again, please hit that like button, comment, subscribe. And if you haven't subscribed to this channel, please subscribe. Please subscribe, because you're going to love it over here. And hit the hype button too. And that help us get deep into that algorithm. So when Black Americans, when we talk about our ancestors built America, we're talking about the physical building, the labor that led to the tangible outcomes, the physical outcomes, the labor that led to the economic boom and the economic growth of America, right? So it's two different conversations and two different definitions of built, and we got to make sure we understand what we mean by built, right? So D'Souza's problem is that he's shifting between who built America politically and who physically built America. And so when critics speak about labor, he responds by talking about the institutions that were built. that rhetorical move changes the subject rather than directly answering the historical claim, right? So the question is, who actually built America? Who built America? But remember, we're having two questions. We're asking two different questions, having two different debates. Because initially, this really isn't about history. Initially, it's about definitions. So my first question I ask, so we can get some foundation here, right, is if I say that Henry Ford built the Ford Motor Company, like, what exactly do I mean? Specifically, what do I mean if I say Henry Ford built the Ford Motor Company? If I say that, what specifically do I mean? So possible answers are that he designed it, he organized it, and he financed it, right? But let me also ask this. Did Henry Ford physically assemble every automobile at the Ford Motor Plant? Of course, that question is no. So then I ask again, who built the company? So the truthful answer is, the truthful answer is Henry Ford created the system. He created the structure. He created the umbrella, everything that is the Ford Motor Company. But the Ford Motor Company would not have been able to exist and thrive without workers physically building the automobiles. So the answer is a bit of both, right? America is similar to this Ford Motor Company. The idea, the structure, the principles, the policies, all these different things came from Henry Ford. But without the physical labor, the Ford Motor Company would not have been able to exist. And so once again, like the Ford Motor Company, America is similar. America was built on multiple levels. America was built politically. America was built economically. America was built physically. America was built militarily. America was built intellectually. America was built agriculturally. And all those different aspects contributed to the building of America. And so the main question that we have to be asking here when we're dealing with Dinesh is, which level of build are you talking about? Because once again, essentially, Dinesh is diminishing the contributions of foundational Black Americans. Dinesh is saying that, and you heard him, he didn't explain anything. We're gonna go through it. We're gonna break this video down. We're gonna go through it. Dinesh is basically saying that the ideas and the political structure alone is what made America what it is today. None of the labor made it what it is today, because you heard him, he said all the contributions of the slaves, of the American slaves, the enslaved Africans, all of their contributions was erased during the Civil War. So why wasn't the contributions of the founding fathers erased during the Civil War? I'm just saying, but we're gonna go through this. We're gonna go through this video and break this thing down. So once again, please hit that like button, comment, subscribe, and share. And remember, we're having two different arguments, two different debates, and Dinesh is intentionally diminishing the contributions of enslaved Africans, of the enslaved foundation of Black Americans. He's intentionally diminishing them. So once again, when we talk about labor, he switches to institutions. No, it's not the labor, it's the ideas. It's the policies, it's the government. Well, that doesn't work without the physical labor. Remember, like, America is not the economic power it is without slave labor. And if you listen to him talk, he never truly debunked it. he talked around it. But let's jump into it. Let's listen. Let's listen.
America was built on slavery. This has become a standard trope of critical race theory. It is something that is taught in our schools. It is something that has now surfaced on a Disney show called The Proud Family. It's a kind of a cartoon show, and but weaved into it are themes of slavery and reparations.
So right there, I can't even really take this dude serious. I'm not taking him serious as an intellectual, because his argument against actual historical fact is The Proud Family, a cartoon. Instead of arguing the facts, you notice how he steps aside from the facts. His argument is, hey, this cartoon called The Proud Family said foundation of Black Americans built this country, and with the labor of enslaved people built the country, but that's not true. But let's keep listening.
And I want to just quote a line or two. This country was built on slavery, which means slaves built this country. And goes on to talk about why that creates a foundation, a moral foundation for reparations. Now, this may seem like inarguable, which is to say self-evident. I want to argue that's one of those things that we tend to take for granted so much that it takes a little bit of thought and scrutiny to realize that it's not true. What is not true? This country was not built on slavery, and slaves didn't build it. And think of how if what I said is true, it blows the foundation for reparations, right?
He never explains himself. If you continue to listen to him, he never explains himself. And this is the point where he's going to switch the argument from arguing the physical labor to arguing the political structure.
Right out of the water. The premise itself is false. But how can it be false? Didn't slaves, at least some would say, well, they certainly helped to build this country, didn't they? And I would say, in a sense, no. And why? The reason I say no is because it's not that the slaves didn't do any building. Slaves, of course, there was some slavery in the North also before the American founding. Most of slavery was either abolished or on its way.
What? What does that mean, Dinesh? What are you talking about? Slow it down and speak. Slow it down and explain yourself. Well, there was some slavery in the no. You said that slaves did not build America. And then you was like, your argument against that is, well, there were some slaves in the North and slaves only built plantations. Now, because trust me, I got a lot of information. I'm gonna let him talk, but I got a lot of information I'm gonna give him. I'm gonna bust his head wide open with this information.
Being abolished in the era of the American founding. And then slavery became more regional. It was in the South, mainly plantation slavery, small and large plantations. Okay, so the slaves built the plantations. But what happened to the plantations in the Civil War? They were destroyed. They were leveled to the ground. Sherman burned Atlanta. So at the end of the Civil War, what was left in the South was very little.
See, once again, reducing the labor of the slaves, especially in the South, and also just confining slavery to the South. And we know slavery was all over America, even in Canada. But confining it to just the building of the plantations, and then when the Civil War happened, plantations are gone. So the contribution of Black America is gone from this immigrant, this Johnny come lately.
Just land, agriculture. The South had to sort of rebuild its way out of, a kind of rubble. So what the slaves built was destroyed during the Civil War. And the idea that America today is somehow built by slavery is, I think, nonsensical. Now, it's tempting for people to go from there to say, well, all right, but what about the immigrants, Dinesh?
I'm not worried about the immigrants. So before we get to the immigrants, let's deal with some history, right? So the angle of the settlers built the nation. And so there is some truth to that. The English colonists established permanent colonies. They created colonial governments. They drafted legal codes. They developed representative assemblies. Now listen to the words I'm using. They wrote the Declaration of Independence. They wrote the United States Constitution. They established Congress. They established the presidency. They established federal courts. They developed early American capitalism. And without those institutions, there would be no United States. That's a political fact. Nobody ever denies that. And see, that's the part about us. It's like we never denied that. In fact, we often talk about how these things were created to work against us, created without us in mind, as a matter of fact, right? But remember, creating a blueprint isn't the same thing as constructing a building. Once again, two different conversations, two different arguments. So suppose someone asks, right, who built the Empire State Building? Because I know people who work in construction, and I hear them all the time saying, hey, me and my crew built this building. Me and my crew built this building because they were the ones who physically did the labor to make this thing physically appear and physically exist, right? So when somebody asks who built the Empire State Building, would you answer the architect? Would you say that the architect is the one who built the building? Not exactly. Would you say the engineers are the ones who built the building? Not exactly. Or would you answer the steel workers are the ones who built the building? Not exactly. But the truthful answer is all of them each contributed differently. The problem with Dinesh is trying to exclude the contribution of the steel workers to say that only the architects and the engineers built the building. When if it was only left up to the architects and the engineers, there would be no physical building. There would be no physical America the way it is today without the labor of foundational Black Americans. The economics in America wouldn't be what it is today without that. And to say that all of that was destroyed just during the Civil War or after the Civil War is crazy, right? So who physically built America? So from approximately 1619 until 1865. And see, we may have to start changing how we say that. We can say we physically built America because the contribution of foundational Black Americans would not be diminished by somebody named Dinesh D'Souza, who this ain't even his lane. He make films. He needs to stick with making films and stop trying to talk history, right? But enslaved Africans supplied an enormous share of the labor that created wealth throughout the colonies and later the United States. See, he's trying to confine the labor of enslaved people to just the South. No, you got to remember it was from 1619 until 1865. And it affected all of America. It started on the east coast of America, came down to the South, definitely spread into the North and over to the West. Slavery was all over the United States. It was not just confined in the South. And the contributions of the labor of foundational Black Americans, whether enslaved labor or not, was not just confined to plantations. Primary historical records, including plantation ledgers, census data, congressional documents, travelers' accounts, and economic records, show that enslaved labor was central to the production of major crop exports and the construction of infrastructure across much of the South. And so he's trying to just take that part and just say, this is the crux of it. This is the bulk of it. This is the only thing that happened with Black labor just in the South. Now, things that they did do, they cleared forests. Millions of acres had to be cleared before farms existed. Trees were cut, roots were removed, stumps burned, land graded, almost all done by hand. They built plantations. That's one thing he got right. They built the houses, the barns, the smoke houses, the roads, ridges, fences, mills, warehouses, docks, levees, canals, slave quarters, blacksmith shops, and carriage houses. They built cities. They built Charleston, Savannah, Richmond, New Orleans, Mobile, Alabama. Many of the brick buildings that remain today were built by enslaved artisans. And you can go to Savannah and all these places and see that. Historical records documented enslaved brick masons, carpenters, blacksmiths, coopers, shipbuilders, plasterers, stone masons. Many were highly skilled craftsmen, not merely field laborers. You got to remember that. The U.S. Capitol. Primary records from the architect of the Capitol and the National Archives and Records Administration documented that enslaved laborers were hired by the federal government to quarry stone, cut timber, haul materials, and assist in the construction of both the United States Capitol and portions of the White House. That's not just confined to the deep South. Notice the distinction. That may be considered the South, but that ain't the South. That's the nation's capital. The architects designed the buildings. Enslaved workers helped construct them. Both statements are historically true. Notice how we never diminish the role of the people who of the founding fathers. We never diminish the role. We just say tell the whole story. That's all we're asking. The nations tell the whole story. America would not be what it is without the contributions of foundational Black Americans. Before the Civil War, enslaved labor dominated production of cotton, tobacco, rice, indigo, sugar. Cotton became America's largest export, and by 1860, cotton accounted for roughly half of the U.S. export earnings. Millions of bales were produced annually through enslaved labor. That wealth fueled banks, insurance companies, shipping firms, textile mills, and international trade. So this is not just confined to the South, Dinesh. So when someone says slavery built America's economy, they're pointing to measurable economic output, not claiming enslaved people created the Constitution. I'm gonna say that one more time. Dinesh, I'm not gonna be mean, but I hope you're using those ears to listen. When someone says slavery built America's economy, they are pointing to measurable economic output. They're not claiming enslaved people created the Constitution. You need to learn how to pay attention. You might have ADD. Railroads. Many Americans assume enslaved people built most railroads. The evidence is more mixed. Enslaved labor helped construct portions of Southern railroads. And this is one part of the part of the argument for the immigrants. Foundational Black Americans who were enslaved, Irish immigrants, and Chinese immigrants, they played a major role in the railroad construction in different regions and periods across this nation. So this is a part of the argument for the immigrants, once again, especially in the early days. And if you go to the Oakland Museum, you can see the contributions of the Chinese in the railroad in California. But let's listen to Dinesh a bit more.
Immigrants built America? No, they didn't either. Now, I'm not saying that the immigrants, again, didn't do anything, they didn't work, but the country was built by the original European settlers.
Once again, even for the immigrants, in that sense, and everything that they contributed to the physical existence of America, not the ideological existence. We're not having an ideological argument. We're having the physical existing argument.
They are the ones who established the economic and political and moral foundations for a strong, prosperous, and decent nation. And then this is me tweeting, we are all living off the fruits of their labor.
So, okay. Let's say another example. I create instructions on how to build a house. I create the instructions. I get the house insurance. Like I get everything cleared to get the house built. But I don't physically build the house. There's no house. I don't even hire anybody to build the house. I come up with all the ideas, the plans, and I lay out everything that needs to happen for this house to be built. all of the legal things, all of the paperwork, all of that is taken care of for this house to be built. But there are no builders. The plot hasn't even been cleared. The land hasn't even been cleared. Did I build a house? Did I build a house? I mean, I did all the legal stuff. I got all my paperwork. I did all the financial stuff. I paid all the money. But the land that the house is supposed to be on isn't even cleared. And there's no house there. Did I build a house? Now, if that land was cleared and that house was physically built, I played a major role in this house being constructed. But now, let's be real. If somebody asked me if I built the house, I'll say no. Such and such company built the house because they physically did it. So Dinesh knows what he's doing. Did Dinesh? I guarantee you Dinesh didn't physically build his house. If I go up to Dinesh and I say, Dinesh, you built your house. Because I'm sure he did all the paperwork, all the legal stuff, all the financial stuff, but Dinesh, you the one who built your house. Well, no, such and such company built my house. Well, no, or on your podcast, your logic was different. But peep what he's doing. He's centering on the ideological and the institutional building in the legal building rather than the physical contribution that actually physically makes America what it is. Because the idea of America don't scare nobody. It's the reality of America that scares people. You got to remember. And the Constitution and all this stuff here, none of that would matter today if they didn't have the economic influx from the physical labor. And then the output of the physical labor to make America what it is, to create more economics.
I knew when I said this, it would sort of set off a little bit of a social media stir, and sure enough, I get all kinds of comebacks.
Well, I'm gonna be real. I'm gonna stop it right there because I'm gonna just stop it right there with him, and I'm just gonna go ahead and kill the rest of his argument because he's talking a lot about the immigrants and stuff. We don't need to get into that. But who created the wealth? Founders, the founders of this nation created the institutions. The laborers created the wealth. The entrepreneurs organized the production. The workers produced the output. Those are complementary roles, not mutually exclusive ones. But once again, Dinesh is trying to make them exclusive, and through his exclusivity, is trying to diminish the output of the workers. You cannot and not only diminish, but limit it to only, well, it just, your contribution just ended at the Civil War. America would have collapsed economically. Let's be real. America would have collapsed economically after the Civil War if the output from slavery just ended there. America would have collapsed economically. Now, the problem with D'Souza's framing, and one of the major weaknesses in this argument, is that he responds to a claim about labor by emphasizing institutions. For example, the claim is slaves built America, and his response is no, the founders created the Constitution. That boy ain't even listening, but he think he's slick, because those are two different propositions. The Constitution was not laid brick by brick. Likewise, enslaved laborers did not write the Constitution. Both statements can't be true simultaneously. The founders created the Constitution, and the enslaved labor built the nation, physically built the nation. A better historical question, instead of asking who built America, is asking who designed America, who governed America, who financed America. Because now we're dealing with specifics and we're dealing with like real definitions, right? Who defended America? Who physically constructed America? Who produced America's wealth? Right? Because now we're looking at everything that contributed to making America America, and we're not diminishing the role of foundational Black Americans. But once again, he's a right-wing knee living, belly crawling brown noser who want white people to love him. Another analogy, right? Imagine building a hospital. The architects design the hospital. The engineers calculate the hospital. The investors finance the hospital. The managers organize the hospital. All right, now you just have an idea of a hospital. Because at this point, you just have an idea. Now, if you add in construction workers building it, the electricians wiring it, the plumbers installing the pipes, now we actually have a hospital that the doctors can eventually operate inside. It's not just an idea of a hospital, it's a physical hospital in existence. So who built the hospital? Once again, we got to ask that question differently, right? Because all of those components contributed to the building of the hospital. But if we're asking, if you're specifically saying who built that hospital, it goes to the construction workers, the electricians, and the plumbers, but more so the construction workers. Now, all those components went into building the hospital, because without the idea of the hospital, without the architects, without the engineers, without the investors and the managers, there's no funds, there are no resources, there's nothing to construct. There's nothing for the electricians, nothing for the plumbers. But the construction workers, electricians, and the plumbers never go around diminishing the role of the managers, investors, engineers, and architects, because they laid the foundation for what the construction workers, electricians, and plumbers can do. But once again, that's what Dinesh is doing. Everybody contributed into making sure this hospital existed. But without the construction workers, there's no hospital. The construction workers are the most important piece to the physical existence of the hospital. The construction workers are the foundational Black Americans. Without the construction workers, there's no building, there's no hospital. Once again, it's just an idea of a hospital. All right. European settlers and founders established many of the country's political and legal institutions. Nobody's denying that. Enslaved Africans and their descendants provided the majority share of the labor that transformed land into productive farms, built infrastructure, and generated extraordinary wealth for America, particularly in the South, but throughout America. Indigenous people shaped the continent long before European settlement. Successive waves of immigrants later built canals, roads, and they contributed to the building of canals, roads, factories, mines, and industries that expanded the nation in the 19th and 20th century. So what Dinesh is doing, because Dinesh woke up and decided to be lame, he's reducing America's development to only one of these contributions, and only giving the contribution to the idea of America, which oversimplifies a much more complex history. Because this is not just simple, well, this group, it's a combination of everything if we want to be historically accurate. And you know, I'm facts over feelings, and I'm about being historically accurate, right? Remember, ideas alone do not construct nations, and labor alone does not create political systems. America's history includes both institution builders and labor builders. And when people argue about who built America, they often mean different things by the same words, which is the trick that they use. Clarifying those meanings lead to a more historically accurate discussion than simply choosing one side over the other. But what we're not going to do is allow Dinesh to downplay the role of enslaved labor. That's what we're not going to do, right? And that's one of my biggest criticisms that is made of Dinesh's argument. It's not necessarily that he's wrong about the importance of the founding fathers, The fathers absolutely established the political institutions, legal framework, and the constitutional system that became America through the system and the religion of white supremacy, right? The criticism is that his argument overtly minimizes the indispensable role of enslaved labor by changing the definition of what it means to build a nation with his punk ass. When many Black Americans say our ancestors built America, they're making a historical claim about labor, production, construction, and wealth creation. And we need to be more specific about that as well. They're talking about who cleared millions of acres of forest, cultivated plantations, harvested tobacco, rice, sugar, cotton, indigo, built roads, bridges, ports, government buildings, homes, railroads, cities, and produced the commodities that generated enormous profit for this young nation, and including the bodies of Black people who were used for sexual means and all those things there, right? Instead of engaging in that claim directly, D'Souza shifts the discussion to ideas, institutions, and political philosophy. Those subjects are historically important, but they answer a different question. Imagine someone asking who built the skyscraper. If your response is the architect designed it, you've answered a related question, but you haven't addressed who actually poured the concrete, erected the steel, installed the plumbing, wired the electricity, or laid the bricks. The architect deserves credit, but so do the thousands of workers whose labor transformed blueprints into reality. But once again, if I ask the question, who built the skyscraper, and you answered the architect designed it, you're not even listening. America's development worked in much the same way. The founders created the blueprint of the nation. The blueprints do not harvest cotton. Blueprints do not harvest cotton. Blueprints do not construct buildings, and blueprints do not generate exports. Those tasks require labor, physical labor. And for nearly 20 to 50 years, much of that physical labor in the American South, or all over America, and even, all over America, was performed by enslaved Africans and foundational Black Americans. This is why historians describe slavery not as a peripheral institution, but as a central component of America's early economic development. And that economic and those economics didn't just go away at the Civil War. The economics of America that was built through slavery continued on, and is still existing in today. By 1860, cotton produced by enslaved labor had become the nation's leading export commodity, accounting for roughly half of all American export earnings. That wealth supported banks, insurance companies, shipping firms, textile manufacturers, merchants, and government revenues that fueled the national expansion. It might have started in the South. And remember, it started in the Northeast, came into the South. It was also in the North. It's just not as talked about in the North, and it wasn't as abundant in the North as the South, but it was in the North, and it went out, expanded out to the West. Recognizing this historical reality does not diminish the achievements of the founders. See, we're not gonna be like the Nesh. We're not gonna say the founders didn't do their part, because we know if they wouldn't have did what they did, we wouldn't be here. We would still be in Africa chilling. Likewise, acknowledging the founders' political accomplishments should not require minimizing the indispensable contributions of enslaved workers. Both are part of the historical record. The problem arises when one contribution is elevated while another is minimized. If America's founders deserve recognition for designing the nation's institutions, then the millions of enslaved men, women, and children whose labor physically transformed the land and produced much of its early wealth that later transformed to the wealth that's today deserve recognition as indispensable builders of the nation as well. I believe the real issue isn't whether America's founders deserve credit. They absolutely do. The issue is whether we're willing to give equal historical honesty to the people whose labor turned those founders' visions into reality. But I think a far right wing brown noser is not going to do that. He went out of his way to try to minimize the impact and the contributions of Foundation of Black Americans. Ideas without labor remain ideas. Blueprints without builders remain pieces of paper. America became a nation because almost cussed. I'm sorry. So America became a nation because some people imagined it, some people governed it, and millions, millions, and millions and millions of enslaved foundational Black Americans against their will, physically built America. They made their ideas a reality. History is most accurate when it gives each of these contributions the recognition they deserve. So we're gonna tell the story, Dinesh. Let's tell the story accurately. Let's tell the whole story. Let's not minimize the contributions of foundational Black Americans just so white people can pat you on the top of your head and like you. White people have already told all you non-white people that you are cool pets, but they don't really like you, and y'all not welcome to their cookout. But Dinesh, you're gonna have to learn the hard way. Let me see who he's married to. Let me see who he's married to real quick. He married to a white lady. I believe she's white. Is married to political activist there, Debbie D'Souza. Debbie D'Souza. Let me see. All right, let me see. Debbie D'Souza is a conservative political activist, recording artist, and filmmaker. She is married to Dinesh D'Souza, a prominent Indian-born American right wing. So I'm guessing, yeah, Debbie is a white woman, as I expected. I kind of figured he was married to a white lady. Yep, he married to a white lady, Debbie D'Souza. Yep. That's how they do it, though. That's how they do it. They want to be down so bad. That they'll do anything. And remember, they have no allegiance to us. They have no reason. To mess with us in any kind of way. They really have no reason to talk bad about us, but we're low-hanging fruit, and most of us ain't gonna do nothing about it. But Dinesh, the mistake you made is that weak-ass argument, and you act like all Black people can't read, and we ain't got no critical sense, no critical thinking, and all that. So I hope you see this video so you can learn something. You ain't got to lie to chill. And you ain't got to try to step on Black Americans to make white people like you. You know. Because once again, we're not diminishing anybody else's history to make ourselves look better or even look like a victim. We're just telling the story exactly how it went. And without the physical labor of Black Americans, there would physically be no America. And the economics of America would not be what it is. America would not be a superpower without the physical labor of Black Americans. So, yeah. But we need to rephrase how we say or how we talk about us building this country, because that'll clear up a lot of stuff. I love you all. Once again, Please continue to support this channel. Thank you to everybody who continues to support this channel. Thank you to KMLTC for sending me this video so I could check it out. I appreciate it because I did not know about this, but I saw other videos of people claiming who built America. So, you know, I really appreciate that. I want to give a big shout out to those who support my channel. G Money Hollywood, appreciate you, my brother, for the $20 Cash App. I appreciate you. And me, Kim, my sister, I appreciate you for the continued support. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And everybody who continued to support this channel, I appreciate y'all. And I'll see y'all later. Peace out.